Hello, I'm Claire and welcome to my channel. So today's video is a question that I think everybody who's into fragrance at some point or another wonders. What is it about a fragrance that makes it feel luxurious? What is it about a fragrance that makes it a premium product? And I'm not talking really about fragrances that are just expensive. You can have an expensive fragrance that doesn't feel luxurious, but really I'm talking about the combination. We all know fragrances can be extremely expensive, and there's been a huge expansion at both extremes of the perfume market over the last 5 years. And I'm just wondering what's driving that polarisation of the market, and really why some £300 fragrances feel quite so ordinary, yet there are also fragrances priced at around £30 that really do punch above their price point. So today I just thought that I would look at what separates a luxury fragrance from an ordinary fragrance, and why some fragrances seem to justify their price points a bit better than others, and really what you're paying for when you pay for a premium fragrance. So if you've not seen me before, I'm Claire. I talk all about fragrance on this channel. I'm a scientist in real life, and I'm someone who just likes to look at perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology. And really, this is looking at the psychology of fragrance. It's looking at what makes you feel like a fragrance is worth you buying it. And if you are interested in that kind of content, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And if you do like this video, then please do press the like button. So firstly, let's just get some things out of the way. I want to lay out some caveats here. Price does not always equal quality. There is for sure some correlation, but I don't think it's a linear relationship, and I think there are some brands that do it better than others. It's also worth saying that the beauty of a fragrance is in the eye of the beholder. You're not looking at an objective product like buying petrol or buying a bag of flour. It's something that is very, very subjective. What is worth it and what isn't? And that's going to be dependent on your budget, your prior experience, and really what you like and value in fragrances. Perfume is just so subjective because some people see it as art, some people see it as chemistry, other people see it as fashion, some people see it as a type of branding. It's really something that can be seen in many different ways. So because of this subjectivity, we all have different ideas about which fragrance is a masterpiece, which fragrance is worth paying for. So rather than asking in this video which expensive fragrances are objectively better, I think it's more useful to ask which characteristics make a perfume feel luxurious. So I'm going to discuss 3 main strands that make a fragrance feel luxurious, and the first one we're going to talk about is the scent itself. So I think the first idea that I want to get across is the idea of complexity. Premium fragrances are generally fragrances that tell stories. They evolve, they go through stages, they create interest throughout the wear of the fragrance. Not every expensive fragrance is going to evolve. Some fragrances are relatively linear, and that's becoming seemingly more and more popular in the fragrance market. I think perhaps modern tastes towards fragrances have driven that change. But luxury is traditionally associated with complexity in fragrances, and fragrances that feel slightly more three-dimensional. You don't just smell one thing. There's things to take your interest throughout the wear of the fragrance. The second thing that I want to talk about is just the smoothness of a fragrance. I find it really annoying when people describe fragrances as well blended. I mean, what does that even mean? You know, every fragrance is mixed, isn't it? It's not like the perfumer whacks the ingredients in and then just leaves it to sit somewhere. They do mix the fragrances, so what does well blended mean? And to me, that's a description that just annoys me when I hear it. But I remember trying Roja fragrances. I remember thinking, oh, you know, there's so much PR flying around. I don't think, you know, this brand's going to be for me. And I bought a sample set just to satisfy my curiosity. And I tried them in a video. And the thing that struck me with them, not that I loved one in particular, although I did like one of those fragrances, it was more that the fragrances themselves felt smooth, which I guess is probably what people mean by well blended, although those 2 words are bandied around on YouTube quite a lot. You hear some people saying it absolutely all the time. I guess what I'll say is, have you ever smelt 2 fragrances that are similar in note profiles, and one just smells better, objectively better. It doesn't have any rough edges, nothing really sticks out as unusual or strange. Everything just seems to meld together and smell like it's got a plan rather than it's all been thrown together. And I guess that's what's meant by smoothness. I guess this again is a matter of personal taste, because some people find it exciting when one thing sticks out beyond the rest of the fragrance. That can be something that is very striking and can be edgy. But I think if you're looking for quiet luxury, something seamless and smooth is very much more what people might expect. I think the next facet is perhaps the feeling that a fragrance is natural. And I think this is a really interesting psychological trick, because of course most fragrances are synthetic. They have at least some components that are synthetic. There's nothing wrong with a synthetic fragrance. In fact, modern perfumery wouldn't exist without synthetic notes. That's how we can all afford fragrances. That's how fragrance has exploded into the market that it has. And that's why we have the diversity of smells in fragrance that we do have, because of the amazing strides in synthetic chemistry that have been made. Synthetic materials can be more stable, longer lasting, safer even, and can sometimes smell even more beautiful than a natural ingredient. They're not always cheap either, because synthetics can sometimes require quite complex processes to produce, and that can make them expensive. That being said, there are genuinely some natural materials that are breathtakingly beautiful and also have a large price point to match. So fragrance ingredients such as iris or orris, a beautiful natural rose absolute, a high quality natural sandalwood extract, a natural jasmine absolute, and even highly prized and sometimes rare ingredients such as oud and Omani frankincense. These ingredients can create a richness, complexity and texture that can be difficult to imitate completely. I think again, preferences for more natural smelling fragrances are very personal. And when you think about premium fragrances, a lot of premium fragrances nowadays are not seeking to even smell natural. There are things out there that are designed to smell like new cars, vinyl, books, petrol, metal, ink. These fragrances are not cheap fragrances, but because of their unnatural feel, that can make them feel less luxurious to some people. To me, even if a fragrance is made up entirely of synthetic ingredients, with the help of a good perfumer, it can still smell very natural. The next point is the quality of the raw ingredients. Of course, this is a teeny tiny fraction of the price, but even with synthetics and absolutely with naturals, there is a huge price difference between different qualities of materials. If you think about the variation just in something like chocolate, you can definitely tell a cheaper product from a more luxurious product. It's the quality of the cocoa, the production techniques, the lack of palm oil that can make a bar of chocolate taste amazing versus something that is really quite mediocre. Perfume materials work together in fragrances in much the same way. There are different grades of ingredients at different prices, and there are actually captive synthetic ingredients that only particular perfume houses will be able to access. There are costly extraction techniques, there are recycled ingredients even nowadays that may command a lower price but may actually make a fragrance feel more premium to some people who are looking to support the environment. That may be something that some people look for in a luxury fragrance. Although it's clearly very important that different fragrance ingredients have these different grades, I think it's clear that not every fragrance company is choosing the highest grade of ingredient when they have higher price points. It's definitely something that is a choice. And we are never really going to know unless they tell us specifically which ingredient they've used. And that is something that luxury brands sometimes do list in their fragrance ingredients. They sometimes do make a song and dance about obtaining a particular absolute from certain location or a particular grade of ingredient. They sometimes do declare that. But ultimately, we don't know the price they've paid for those ingredients. And also, as people who aren't involved in perfumery, we do not know the premium that those ingredients command. In general, for larger businesses, and especially with fragrance companies with large production volumes, The price of the ingredients of the fragrance do not reflect the price you pay, really in the slightest. It is such a small proportion of the overall cost of a fragrance. And that is simply because there are so many other costs to build into the price of a fragrance, which I will talk about later. The exception here is smaller producers. So if a small indie producer is producing much smaller production volumes, then they are going to have greater costs. They don't have the purchasing power of a big fragrance house, and that means that they will pay more for ingredients, and the price of the ingredients will contribute more to the overall cost of a fragrance. Clearly, the marketing, distribution, bottling, manufacturing profits, retailer profits all take a huge chunk out of the retail price and probably contribute to the overall retail price of a fragrance much more than the fragrance ingredients ever could do. The next point I want to explore is originality. For me, originality adds a huge dose of luxury to a fragrance. If I smell something and think, oh, I've smelt this 100 times before, I'm just not excited by it and I don't feel the need to purchase it. It's just not something that I'm going to want to own. It instantly feels less special. Some fragrances just introduce you to unique combinations of notes. They challenge you even on the first wear, and it may take a few wears for you to get used to the idea of the fragrance even. But that creative risk can make a fragrance feel genuinely premium. If you think about how designer fragrances are, they're really meant to be instantly likable. They're things that are really meant to grab your attention in the first few seconds and make you buy them in store. The flip side to originality is that sometimes fragrances can feel unwearable, and that doesn't feel luxurious. If it's something that you don't necessarily feel comfortable wearing, it's not going to feel luxurious at all. But the benefit of originality is something that's memorable, something that's impactful. I think a great example of this is when Baccarat Rouge 540 burst onto the perfume market. That was a fragrance that nobody had really experienced anything like, and it spawned an entire market of similar fragrances in the same vein. And that kind of trend setting is something that you associate with a luxury fragrance. You know, nobody had ever come across that unique combination of Hedione, Evanyl, Voltol and Ambroxan together before Baccarat Rouge 540. And that's really what's created that entire new genre of fragrances. Similarly, we might think of other modern perfumers' creations, so particularly Biche's creations. I think whilst they can be controversial, they do stand out as very different. His work is very distinctive, and he does tend to create combinations that you haven't smelt elsewhere. Of course, sometimes Biche dupes his own work, and that can be a little bit jarring, but a lot of the time, his compositions are unique. Point 6 is all about attention to detail, and I think that really the best fragrances are those that perform well in lots of different weather conditions. The fragrances that smell good both on skin and in the air. These are actually details that a lot of people will not notice, but actually it's almost like when you're looking at a well-tailored piece of clothing. You don't necessarily know why a fragrance is luxurious, but there's something about that fragrance that tells you that it's seemingly better than others. And those kinds of little details, you know, having something that smells amazing both when you're sniffing it on your wrist and versus when you've sprayed it in the air, those are the details that get people to buy a fragrance. Much like a well-tailored piece of clothing, they give a feeling of refinement. So point 7 is performance, and I really want to caveat this with to a point. I think for sure there are some requirement for longevity and also projection, but I think traditionally luxurious fragrances were thought of as things that really were intimate. They weren't things that were beast mode. They weren't going to scream at people from across the room. These fragrances were things that you had to be within someone's personal space to experience. They are also fragrances that have clearly a minimum amount of time that you would expect them to stay on the skin, but they aren't fragrances that need to last 24 hours. And I think almost in modern perfumery there's a bit of an obsession in creating fragrances with crazy performance, crazy projection, and that's almost to the detriment of how fragrances actually smell sometimes. A fragrance that lasts 24 hours is usually something that's quite linear. It's something that can be quite boring after a while and almost annoying. And I think that's not something that I think of as a luxury fragrance. Essentially what I'm saying is performance and quality are not the same thing. And sometimes they are totally not related. Point 8 is that different fragrances can have different perfumers, and I think certain luxury brands might be seeking particular perfumers to formulate their fragrances. Just as you might expect to pay more for a painting that's been painted by a very famous artist, you might expect to pay more for fragrances by particular perfumers. And I think this is somewhat complicated in the industry because a lot of the biggest perfumers work for large fragrance conglomerates that actually make fragrances for lots of different brands. So in a way, you can sometimes find a much cheaper fragrance made by the same perfumer, and that is kind of a way to get round this issue. But often I think with niche fragrances, you will often have the perfumer having a slightly looser rein to do what they want with a fragrance and to spend more on ingredients, which can actually mean that their compositions with particular brands can smell very different to their compositions with more affordable brands. So moving on to the second strand. So the second strand is really all about the presentation of fragrances. This is what makes a fragrance stand out on a shelf full of other fragrances to a consumer, or can attract a consumer in a social media video. Luxury brands spend an enormous amount of money, time, effort and thought on designing their fragrance bottles. And that's really the first thing that I want to talk about, the design of fragrance bottles. I think when you have fragrances at cheaper price points, you may recognise the same bottle being used by numerous different brands. That is not something that's going to happen with a luxury brand. Interesting designs can be very quirky and can attract attention, but of course more simply lined bottles in more classic designs do feel often more luxurious. Ornate bottles rely on that particular design being your particular taste, and that is something that's really risky because often our tastes are very individually different. One brand that I think has really struck a nice balance between something quite classical and something quite edgy is Dries Van Noten. If you think about their bottles, they feel heavy, they feel luxurious, they feel durable, and they feel quirky, but they're striking, they're modern, they're design-led, they're refillable, and they definitely fit with the brand image. Ironically, heavy glass bottles are often cited as something that customers consider to be luxurious. However, heavy glass has transportation costs, it's less environmentally friendly, and it's something really that many other markets are completely moving away from. But luxury products like Perfume do seem very stuck in the mud over their preferences towards heavier designs. I guess consumers in their minds perhaps associate heavier glass with something that's less flimsy, something that's more durable and is going to last well. So many brands say that they do incorporate recycled glass, so brands such as Chanel even are incorporating recycled glass in small percentages in their bottles, and then some other brands have completely switched where possible to recycled glass. So for example, Miller Harris are a brand that only sell fragrances in recycled glass. Another little design feature that seems to be valued and loved by consumers are magnetic caps. Magnetic caps are more expensive to produce, they're heavier, so they give that luxury feel to a bottle, they add to the weight of the bottle, but they also say to a consumer that that brand cares about details. They have a precision to them. If you're putting a magnetic cap back on a bottle, you don't need to line it up, you don't even need to put it anywhere near the bottle. There's a very satisfying little snap when the magnetic cap snaps in place, and that is something that consumers absolutely love. Precision is something that's widely recognised that consumers value, and magnetic caps provide that. Point 3 is a good atomizer. This seems like something that should just be standard, but I have seen some absolutely dreadful atomizers and some truly fantastic atomizers that have completely wowed me. And it sounds weird, doesn't it? It sounds odd to say that an atomizer has wowed you, but some atomizers are so fine, distribute the fragrance beautifully. They're so easy to press, but you can stop very easily. You have complete control over the fragrance. You can aim it precisely. You're not going to get it on your clothes. Sometimes those little details really add to a feeling of luxury. And when I'm looking for a luxury fragrance, I'm expecting those little details like a great atomizer to be there. Atomizers also add to the overall experience of trying a fragrance. If that atomizer produces a lovely fine mist that distributes widely across the surface, that is going to give you a better impression of the opening of the fragrance, and it's probably also going to affect how much that fragrance projects, at least in the short term, which is going to create a good impression to the customer. Essentially, with a bad atomizer, the feeling of a fragrance dripping slowly down your arm after you've sprayed is just not a feeling of luxury. There are entire videos on atomizers on YouTube. There are people obsessing about details of atomizers. I think, I care to an extent, but I don't care too much, but I am impressed by a good one. And I think it does give an impression of luxury. It's something that does have an impact. So point 4 is also the presentation of the fragrance other than the bottle. So they want something that's going to protect the fragrance during transit. They want something that's going to feel luxurious when it reaches the customer. When you're buying a fragrance for yourself, you almost create an idea of a from me to me gift. It's something that makes you feel ever so slightly more special, wearing a fragrance that you feel is a luxurious fragrance. And companies really want to maintain this feeling because it's going to be within their interests to keep up to your expectations. So companies do use, really, to me, excessive amounts of packaging. And I think there are some companies that do it better than others. So I think packaging that I think is seriously beautiful is packaging from brands like Dior or Guerlain. I think those brands also have options for people who perhaps don't want as much packaging as perhaps some people might expect for fragrances at those price points. They have environmentally friendly options. And then there are also brands that I think do have crazy amounts of packaging. And you end up with some brands of having a box within a box within another box. And you just think at some point, where does this end? How many layers of packaging are required? And a great example of this is Xerjoff. So I'm going to show you my Naxos packaging. So this is the outer box. This is to protect the inner boxes. So this is the outer version. Then you have this, which is the inner packaging. And inside this, you then get the actual presentation box. And inside this, you then have some layers of wrapping, which you can unfurl. And then finally, within that box, you have the Xerjoff fragrance itself. And when I think about this amount of packaging, and I think about me keeping these layers of packaging, I wonder, one, why I'm doing it, and two, whether anybody else out there also keeps every single layer of packaging for their fragrances. And it really can begin to feel a bit overwhelming when you have a large fragrance collection, because it pretty much more than doubles the space in which your bottles take up. But it seems silly to throw it away, because this is so much of the price point of those fragrances that you almost feel like you're throwing away cash if you get rid of the packaging. It's mad in a way, and I do wonder how many other people out there do keep all of the layers of packaging, or whether I'm just some slightly strange person for doing this. But I think the idea of the packaging is essentially to create a gift-like feel for the perfume, to make it feel ever more special to the consumer. Taken together, all of these factors influence our idea of the presentation of perfumes, and psychologically they can influence our expectations of how a scent is going to smell and how much we're going to enjoy it. If something appears to be more luxurious, we perceive it as more luxurious. It doesn't mean we're imagining things, it just means that our brains combine lots of sources of information to make judgments. And of course, perfume brands will capitalise on that. Creating the impression of luxury is half of the battle won for perfume companies. So the third strand to luxury is the idea of exclusivity, and perfume brands often capitalise on the idea of exclusivity. They create fragrances that are special editions, limited production. They talk about rare or exclusive ingredients. They have limited distributions. Perhaps they market the fragrance only in one company's stores. I think there's also a perception of branding with large and small companies that can have different effects on different people. So some people really value large brands because they see those as things that are prestigious, that people recognise as expensive brands with exclusive feeling fragrances. And then there are smaller brands that can feel somehow more exclusive to some people because they are things that people don't always know about. And that can make people curious when they smell a new fragrance on somebody, and it can also mean that you can keep your signature scent, your own signature scent. You don't have to share it with other people. You're not going to risk other people wearing the same fragrance as you because it's something that not a lot of people know about. And some people really value that as a feeling of luxury. Whether these sort of ideas of scarcity are worth paying more for is entirely a personal decision. And I think as well, there are certain occasions where customers have really felt a little bit duped by fragrance brands, particularly with special editions which later on appear in permanent lines of fragrances. It's a way to alienate your customers. And my final strand to exclusivity is the price point itself. And of course, in that price point, you're not only paying for the fragrance ingredients, that's a teeny tiny part of the price you pay. You're also paying for the marketing of the fragrance. You're paying for those celebrity events. You're paying for the endorsements. You're paying for the influencer marketing. You're paying for those free bottles. You know, I've talked in a video before where I discussed the rates at which affiliate links pay influencers. Those links can pay anything up to between 15 and 20% per fragrance purchased, which is not pennies. It's really quite a lot of money per bottle of fragrance for some brands. And this obviously has to be paid for. It's paid for by the consumer. Brands also run luxury boutiques and exclusive locations. We pay for those. We pay for their running. We pay for the rental of the properties. We also pay for launch events and actually for those brands to be at events such as Essence. So essentially what I'm saying is paying twice as much for a fragrance does not mean you're getting twice as much. Some brands just spend a lot more money on marketing, on retailing, and on distributing their fragrances. Sometimes though, you are paying for a more expensive fragrance. Sometimes you're just paying for branding, and sometimes you're paying for a mixture of both. Of course, the hallmark of exclusivity is the price point. If a fragrance is something that everybody can afford, it is by definition not exclusive. There's an awful lot of psychology to price points and where they are set, depending on what the brand wants. Heavy discounting is also something that can damage brands. And, you know, there are lots of brands that just do not do discounts. They just do not do discounting at all under any circumstances. Brands that I can think of that are like that are things like Chanel and brands like Diptyque. If you go to a price event, for example, in a department store in the UK, you will sometimes see Chanel on offer, but it's never really any more than 10 or 15%. And usually it's the retailer that's taking that hit. The other great example, Diptyque, is a brand that just opts out entirely of promotions. They don't even allow the store itself to pay for the discount on their fragrances. They just will not allow their fragrances to be sold at any lower than the RRP. Brands that maintain their price point, as annoying as it is to consumers, somehow also maintain their feeling of being worth buying. And that's because brands that don't do offers are always at the same price point, which means that there is no benefit to delaying your purchase. If you know a fragrance brand is only going to increase its prices with inflation, there is no reason to wait to purchase. You might as well buy it now. And that's what brands want. Of course, many other prestigious brands do have sales, but these are carefully targeted and they're carefully managed to ensure that the brand's reputation is not damaged by the sales. So my final thoughts on this are really that there isn't one particular price point above which every fragrance is luxurious. I think it's very much something that's subjective. I think even cheaper fragrances can feel luxurious. And I think ultimately there are fragrances out there at pretty much every price point that can feel luxurious to somebody. It's so much a matter of personal taste. For me personally, the feeling of luxury comes from something original, something artistic, and something with an emotional impact on me. And that's something that you can't necessarily predict. But I also think for a lot of people, it's the whole package. It's about the way the fragrance smells, it's about how the fragrance has been constructed, it's about how the brand talks about the fragrance, it's about the packaging, and it's about the idea of scarcity and exclusivity. So I hope you enjoyed my little run through of what I believe makes a fragrance feel luxurious. I'd love to hear your own thoughts on that. What is luxury to you in the world of fragrance? Also, if you have enjoyed this video, then please do press the like button and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.